Wriggles clear. Might just get the chip, and he does. He's scored. Oh, what a great goal! He's done it. Oh, brilliant play. Wiggling his way. That's an excellent ball. And Didi. It's a goal. Four for Clydebank. Excellent play by Hughes. I think the player of the match, and sweetly finished by Kenny.
Hello and welcome to Shoot the Breeze, where we take a nostalgic look at a random football magazine from the past. I'm Andy Smith, aka Scott's Footy Cards on Twitter, and with me is Tom Brogan.
Hello.
In each episode we'll invite a special guest to join us in trawling through the magazine and discuss anything contained within it. This could be anything from an article, to a photograph, to a competition, to an advert. Basically, if it's in it, then we'll talk about it. So sit back and let's shoot the breeze.
And our guest this week was inducted into the Scottish Football Hall of Fame in 2010. As a player, he was on the books of Rangers, Dundee and Falkirk. As manager, he was in charge of Clyde, Preston North End, Motherwell and Aberdeen. He's managed Scotland in more internationals than anyone else. We're delighted this week to be joined by Craig Brown. Thanks for coming on, Craig.
Thank you. Delighted to be with you, Tom.
Yes, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure and an honour to have you on, Craig. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks. It's a pleasure too, Andy. Thank you.
So we've picked out a Shoot magazine for you this week, and it's 1st of November 1980. So we'll just start with it as the way we normally do on the front cover. So the front cover is a colour photo of Steve Williams with the heading Southampton's Odd Man Out. So inside they discuss the youngster. There's Winner Walk is another of the front page titles. So Shoot look at Ipswich Town and Scotland star John Wark. There's also League Cup previews where they take a look at the League Cup games coming up in England, and there's a special report on the good side of soccer where they look at the fans, the leagues, the model professionals and the exciting youngsters that make up the English game. In colour we have a Celtic and Derby County team groups and club spotlights, with the Celtic team group being a double page centre spread and the Derby County one being a single page photo. The cover price is 22p. Oh. So would you have got magazines yourself, Craig, at this point? I mean, I know.
Yes, I bought the Shoot magazine when it was on the go. Okay. I think that one that you kindly let me have a look at was November 1980. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I was buying it then because I'm a football nut and I just anything to do with football and any magazine. I do currently contribute to a magazine called Backpass, which is a kind of retro magazine. And I write the Scottish stuff for Backpass magazine, so I'm advertising it here just now. But I looked through, that was a great magazine, that Shoot one that you let me have a look at, and I looked for all the Scottish connections in it. And we could be here for 2 or 3 nights talking about it. And it's an English-based magazine, Shoot, but great Scottish stuff in it. And I think the most current one, Peter Lorimer's got a section in it telling how he came back from Canada. He was playing over there, and there's Archie Gemmill, there's Tommy Dockman. I'm looking at them all there's a Jim Baxter article, and I was privileged to be the first player at Rangers to meet Jim Baxter because I was injured as usual and they signed him in the summer. He came from Raith Rovers, 22,000. It was a big signing fee at that time. That would be
1960, was it?
59 or 60, yeah. 1960. Well, I'm in the treatment room, and then in he came with the manager, who was Scott Simon, and they introduced him to me. And of course, we were pegged alphabetically in that Rangers dressing room. Right. And even the young boys like myself, I never got a game in the first team ever. I was there 3 years. I never got a game. But I was pegged, and it was Baird, Sammy Baird, Baxter, Brown, Caldo. Now, there was 3 legends there, Sammy Baird, Jim Baxter, Eric Caldo, and then this wee guy, Brown. And I'll not keep you back, but I'll just tell you, you're a nervous boy when you go to a big club and you're only 17, 18 at the time. And I'm trying my very best and I'm quite nervous. And then big Sammy Baird, sadly deceased, I'm afraid, but Sammy called me over after 3-4 days training. He says, "Come here, son. Did you win a competition to train with the team?" So I don't think he thought I was very good. He probably was quite right. But So that didn't do your confidence much good, but I think Sammy hit the nail on the head. I must have won a competition because I was in among the big stars. But sorry, I'm getting off the story, but
I think. Sorry, I think Eddie's would be happy to win a competition like that. So if it was, you well with that.
Well, there was a wee guy called Johnny Hubbard at Rangers. Now, the older Rangers fans will remember he was the penalty king. I think he had, I think about 90 penalties for Rangers. Rangers were always getting a penalty, and Johnny was taking them. And I think he missed 2. I think in all his career. But wee Johnny was a nice wee South African guy, and he said to me, "Brownie, leave that big Sammy Baird to me." And I said, "Oh." So he says, "Come in after the game on Saturday." I said, "But I'll not be in the team." "Don't worry if you're in the team. Come in after the game. The young boys can come in and we'll be in the bath." Now, in those days, it was a bath. Now it's showers, and there was no subs. So there was 11 of them in the bath. And wee Johnny came in and he winked to me and he said, "Sammy," to Sammy, "Sammy, there was 57,823 out there today." And of course, Big Sark said, "Wait a minute, we're in the bath. The game's just finished. How do you know 57,823? And wee Johnny Hubbard says, "How do I know? I was counting them waiting on a pass from you greedy rascal." And he winked at me and he says, "I'll put him in his place." But anyway, you'll gather I'll look for the humour in football. And that I started away as a young boy. And anything that was, they put a smile on your face. And I'm still like that. I'm looking for the humour.
Brilliant. The fact that you mentioned, I mean, we talk about it all the time, how there was so much Scottish content in these magazines. And I sort of take it up to the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s was when that sort of started changing, and probably because of the conception of the English Premier League back then. But yeah, the amount of Scottish content was refreshingly really good in this thing. But sadly, it highlights a lot of what was missing these days, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I read a lot of the stuff. Some great articles in that, guys like Jim Clooney, and of course, I think I knew every Scottish. Billy McNeill, I knew very well, sadly passed away last year. But, I was lucky in my young footballing experience in that I played with the 2 Scotsmen that have held the European Cup. One as a player and one as a manager. And I played in the same team, the Scottish youth team, with Billy McNeill. And that's my claim to fame. And Billy and I were in the same Scotland under-18 team. And they came up to Celtic Park and we played England and we won 3-0. Yeah. The next year, I was still aged to play, and in the team was Alec Ferguson. It wasn't Sir Alec then, it was just Alec. So that one year under 18, I played with Billy in the team. And the next year, Alec was in the team, and we played England in London and we lost 4-3. So I always wind Alec up. I said, "We're all right when we had Billy McNeill in the team. And then we get you. Then we get you and we lost to England." But
you went to Celtic with Billy, didn't you? For trials. You went to Celtic with Billy for trials?
Well, I did. I travelled with him because we both trained at Celtic, and the late Jock Stein took us as young boys. Celtic invited all the sort of promising youngsters in the west of Scotland. Of course, they won the European Cup, and all the players were from the west of Scotland, the whole team. It was quite incredible. Now you go to see Celtic, you're lucky if you get a Scottish player, you'll maybe get 3. I saw Rangers play in Europe 2 weeks ago, and that they had only 1 player eligible for the Scottish international team, and it was the goalkeeper, McGregor, and McGregor has retired from international football. So Rangers, the best team in Scotland just now, not 1 eligible for Scotland. Ryan Jack was injured, or he might have been. But now Celtic in those days were full of Scottish internationalists, and Billy was the main man at that time, Billy McNeill. And of course, they won the European Cup, and they won it with a team all from 30-mile radius of Glasgow, which is quite exceptional. You never get that again.
Yeah. Absolutely. We'll jump into the magazine here, Craig, and look at pages 2 and 3. I'm going to start with here. So the first one is a shoot view, and it talks about Bob Latchford of Everton, and he's been singled out by Shoot for some praise after his return to goal scoring form after a frustrating period with the Toffees. He's currently on 106 league goals and has his eyes on catching Sandy Young's total of 213, even though he concedes that he has no chance of catching Dixie Dean's 349. Now, just as a wee spoiler, Latchford didn't add to that total at Everton. He moved to Brisbane Lions, where he played 4 games and scored 4 goals before moving on to Swansea. And he scored a total of 235 league goals in 550 games and 12 England caps with 5 goals. So, I mean, that's a pretty decent goal scoring record.
That's a fabulous goal scoring record, I think. In any era, today it would be outstanding. It would be worth a fortune. At that time, too, very difficult to score as many goals as he scored. But, I mean, Latchford was very well renowned, even up in Scotland. We weren't seeing quite as much of the TV stuff as we get now. Nothing like as much, but still we knew about the quality that he had.
Yeah, a big footballing family as well. There was Peter and David, was it as well? David.
Aye, that's right. Yeah. So I mean, it's I see in the page there. Oh no, this is Mick Robinson with Malcolm Allison. They're talking about below, but I think. You said Everton he played for, and of course, when you're from Scotland, you look down into Liverpool and you say there are 2 teams there. It's like Glasgow. Well, there were 5 teams in Glasgow at one time, but or at least 4. You had Thistle and Queen's Park and Clyde and the Old Firm. So there were 5. Now down in Liverpool there are the 2. You're either a blue or a red down there, and I always associated myself or supported the team that had more Scots in it at the time. Yeah. And I think over the years, probably Liverpool had slightly more, although some of my pals played at Everton, very good guys like Davy Weir, captain of Everton, and wee Joe Harper went down to Everton, played there, and Jimmy Gabriel from Dundee to Everton. But, there were, I think, a few more I could rattle off. I'll be here all night talking about the Liverpool connection with Scotland.
Were you, Billy Stevenson was at Rangers when you were there then, eh?
Yes, he was. He went to Liverpool, that's right. Now, I thought, I was the same position as Billy, left half, and I thought when he goes, I might get a chance.
And then Jim Baxter come in.
But they signed Baxter, and that scuppered my career a bit. And I played a lot in the reserves. But a reserve game in those days, there was a big attendance at reserve fixtures because the first team would be playing, say they were playing at Dunfermline. The stadium, the ground rather at East End Park couldn't hold as many as would like to go. So you would get 7,000 or 8,000 staying in Glasgow watching the reserves. But Billy Stevenson was a wonderful player, and he was in possession of the left half position when I went. And then there I got signed as a young boy, and then in came Jim Baxter. And I'm quite honoured because I was very friendly with Baxter. I thought you might mention him, so I've got his book here, and I don't know, can you see it?
Yeah.
And you see the honour I got there. I don't know if you see it at the bottom. I had to write the foreword for his book. Can you see it in the bottom there? And it says the foreword by myself and the afterword by Walter Smith. Now, that kind of tells you that I was friendly with Jim Baxter. I could never play like him. But we just marvelled at him, the ability that he had. And that game when we beat the world champions, Scotland went down to Wembley. And he was playing keepy uppy with England. The Scotland team went down, the team that had won the World Cup. And the next year, and Baxter was one of the main men, along with the guys that scored the goals, with Dennis Law, Bobby Lennox and Jim McCallion. So, I mean, I loved that era. And of course, I was involved at a lower level. I wasn't at Rangers that long, but I was friendly with Baxter. And prior to that, I travelled in the same bus to Celtic Park as Billy McNeill. He got on at Motherwell, I got on at Hamilton, and we trained there. And they didn't ask either of us to sign for ages and ages. And they never ever asked me any time. They knew better. But Billy was desperate to sign for Celtic. And a lot of English clubs were offering him a contract. And he said, I'm waiting on Celtic, Craig. I'm waiting on Celtic, because he was Celtic through and through. and I didn't say I was just waiting on anybody that would take me. But I signed for Rangers, which with hindsight maybe was a mistake because I was never going to make it there at that age. But I went on loan. That was unusual in those days. I went on loan to Dundee.
Yeah. And
that was a very good club, Dundee, at the time. And a couple of years later, we won the championship and beat Rangers and get into the semi-final of the European Cup. It was a very, very, very good Dundee team.
I mean, you sort of say that we won the championship, but that's huge. That's absolutely huge, and I just don't think it's appreciated enough nowadays.
Yeah,
how big?
Sorry, Andy. Yeah, you're right. You're right. It was huge in those days. It would be even greater now because the gap, the financial gap between the old firm and the rest now is increasing. But it was so huge then. So I would say Dundee, a provincial club, to win the Scottish Championship and then go into Europe. And when you think of the teams that we managed to beat in Europe, the first round, the German champions Cologne, hammered them. Then the next game was Sporting Lisbon, beat them. The next game was Anderlecht Brussels, beat them. I mean, it's hardly thinkable. Then the semi-final was AC Milan. And unfortunately, after a good result at home, we went over there and lost 3-1 over there. But I mean, that was the semi-final. And the incentive that year, that was 1963, the final was at Wembley. And it ended up for Milan and Benfica. And AC Milan won it. Now, they beat us in the Dundee in the semi-final. So we weren't too bad at that time, I can tell you. And I was privileged. I was never a regular first choice pick, but I got the 12th number of appearances and got a championship medal and was with the squad in every European venture. So if there had been substitutes then, I think I had a record number of substitute appearances, I think, because if anyone got hurt in the middle or the back, in the fence or midfield, I came in and I managed to hold my place for a while. Then I'd be dropped again. And then I get back in. And the manager, this is an interesting one. The manager was Bob Shankly, the older brother of Bill Shankly. Fantastic manager. And he the same as Bill, just the same Ayrshire chat. You know, the press would say, "What's your team?" Mr. Manager would say to him, "What's your team for today?" He says, "Our Greta hasn't picked it yet." His wife was Greta. You know, it would say things like that. And it's really funny. Doing the team group photograph, I'll not go on too long. I'll tell you this. I love this story. We would all be standing there, and he positioned you in the team, and he was meticulous about your turnout. Your jersey had to be in, your stockings had to be the same turnover, and your laces had to be white. They were all white then, and they washed the laces after every game. You take your laces out your boots, and they got washed. Anyway, we're waiting the team photo, and he was the good players, the international players, in the middle of the photo. Alan Gilzean, Ian Ewer, Alec Hamilton, Bobby Cox, all the stars in the middle. And I'm standing at the side, I'm saying, "Am I going to get in this photo?" And eventually he would point to the chair, the seat at the end of the front row. And he never called me Craig, he always called me Christ Craig. Even for a good game, he said, "Christ Craig, that wasn't bad today." And he said, "Christ Craig, just sit down there at the front. A pair of scissors will get rid of you." So you knew if you were put at the front row at the end. Yeah. And that would be the calendar at Christmas time. Now this is in July, we're getting the team photo. So if he was getting rid of you, if you thought you were on the way out, he would put you at the end of the row. And then when the calendar came out, they just cut you off. But I lasted nearly 6 years there, so it wasn't too bad. But the boys all joke, they say, "Wonder what he'll say to you today." Christ Craig, they called me. So I got exalted to the deity. But my performances didn't always merit that. But anyway, Shankly had great.
What was Alan Gilzean like as a player?
Magnificent. He was, well, I'll tell you how good they think he was. We thought he was fantastic. Any man that can go to Ibrox and score 4 against Rangers, we won 5-1, he scored 4. And that tells you what he was like. But he went to, I'll tell you how good he was. He died 2 years ago, And I've never been as impressed with a football club as I was on that occasion, because the team that played with him at Tottenham Hotspur, they chartered an aircraft up to, there's a landing strip up at Dundee, to the funeral. Right. And they came out and they were immaculate. They all had the club blazer and the club tie. Now, it was just about the full team that played in his era. And I spoke to Mullery, the captain, Alan Mullery, and I introduced, I said, excuse me, I was at Dundee with Alan. What was he like at Tottenham? He says, he is the king of White Hart Lane. And I said to Mullery, I thought you were the king. He says, no. He says, there has never been anyone as popular at White Hart Lane than Alan Gilseen. And he didn't need to say that. He said to me, Gilly, they just absolutely adored him. And I could see why. He was a wonderful player, a great and a very nice chap as well. So, and he got transferred to London at the same time. Another player at Dundee, Ian Ure, went to Arsenal. Yeah. Roughly the same amount of money, around between 60 and 70,000. I think 62,000 was the cost of both of them. And of course, the Dundee team that had done so well in Europe, when they sold these two, that was the decline of the Dundee. And then many years later, it was, of course, that United took over in Dundee. So in my time in Dundee, United, that was an easy game. But then there was a complete turnaround later when in the 60s, Jim McLean took over at United and they were in European final and they won the league. So, I'm sorry, I'm not talking about the Shoot magazine here.
No, not at all.
Don't worry about it. We can, as I say, we just go wherever the conversation takes us.
Oh, well, you better direct me because I'll start blathering away.
Okay, you spoke about, you mentioned Malcolm Allison there, so that's the next one I'm going to look at. So there's an article here and it's about Michael Robinson, and he says, Michael Robinson has a point to prove to Malcolm Allison, who released him from Man City after an unhappy time under his reign. Allison, who's no longer in charge at City, has since described Robinson as one of his 3 bad signings for the club. Robinson says, it was a conflict of ideas which led to my departure. Malcolm Allison wanted me to do things I was not capable of. He wanted me to play in the wing or up front on my own. In the end, I knew I had to leave. Now, Brighton boss Alan Mullery, who you've just spoke about there, has told Robinson to just play the way he wanted, as a centre forward, and above all, to enjoy the game. Now, after Shoot starts the article saying Robinson had a point to prove, Robinson himself continues, I've got nothing to prove in this match. The fact is, even if I scored 5 goals against City on Saturday, Malcolm would still claim that I was better in another position. So just as a little spoiler from that game, he did score in the game against Man City, but unfortunately it was a single goal and they went down 2-1 to City. So it's, Mick Robinson, who died quite recently, Tom, wasn't it? The last couple of months, I think it was cancer he died of. He moved over to Spain and was doing a lot of punditry there. Do you have many recollections of Mike?
No, I've got to honestly admit, one of the few in the magazine that I'm not too familiar with. But when you disagree with your manager, there's only one winner.
Yeah.
And if your manager is Malcolm Allison, I mean, you're really not going to win that argument and that battle, because he's, I always think that a manager in football has got more power than a manager anywhere else. You could be a head teacher of a school or a principal of a university, you could own a factory, you could own a business anywhere. Now, you get good control over your employees because you pay them. But a football manager has even more control because not only does he pay them, he picks them. And the power of selection is an enormous tool that a football manager has. If he wants you and he puts you in the team, that's great for you. But if he decides not to, so that he's got terrific hold over all his players. I've always felt that. And people say to me, particularly working with the national team, how these big stars, these millionaires, and guys like that, how do you handle them? I said, I honestly feel you don't have to handle them. You just either pick them or you don't. They all want to be picked. And the power you've got is twofold. One, the power of payment, and two, the power of selection. And it's great to have that power, but if you abuse it, and you can only lose that in two ways. And I don't know, one manager's book I read. I love reading the autobiographies. It might have been Carlo Ancelotti, but one manager I read, and he quite clearly said, you've got the power of selection, the power of payment. You can only lose it in two ways. Lose that power. One, by being incompetent. If you're incompetent, you lose the dressing room. Two, if you're dishonest. You cannot tell a player a lie and get away with it. You can't say to a boy, I'll play you next week. You're in the team next week. Or I'll give you a move to such and such. And you don't do it. If you do that, you're done, because it goes round the dressing room like wildfire. They'll talk to each other, and your credibility's gone.
Yeah.
So I'm digressing. And Malcolm Allison was a very high-profile, well-known manager, and he didn't need anyone giving him power, but he had it. And of course, he had the power over Mick Robinson. Did he pick him or did he not? When I read the article, and when I heard you read it there as well, I thought, it just confirms there's only one winner here, and it's the manager.
Yeah, so moving on to the next page, and it's on the same page actually. So it's they're looking at one of the games of the day, and it's Leicester City versus Wolves. And Wolves have only won one of the last 10 league games at Leicester back in 1971 in December.
Yeah.
When goals from Frank Monroe and Derek Dougan won it for them.
Yeah.
As a spoiler, that run would continue as Leicester won 2-0 at Filbert Street.
Well, I remember Frank Monroe at Dundee United, and he signed for Wolves. He's a very good central defender, Big Frank. And the Wolves did him, and I've got to say, it was during the war, and it didn't really work out too well. My father was signed by Wolves, and the war interrupted his career, and he therefore my team in England, because my dad played for Wolves at wartime. And of course, when the war finished, he was 5 years older and came back to Scotland, and he ended up playing for a while for Partick Thistle, but not at any great level. Now, at Wolves, I loved the colour of their strip, and their manager was a guy called Ted Vizard. And what the managers in England used to do, would take the train up to Scotland to see a player, to look to Glasgow to look, say, for a player, and they would never go into Central Station in the train, because there were guys there, if they saw a manager coming up from England, they were getting a backhander to tell the press. So what they did, and I remember my father saying, we're going to meet the Wolves manager. Oh, are we? I'm a wee boy, And I said, oh. He says he's getting off at Motherwell because, and I'll pick him up there, and we're going to a game. And he wanted to be anonymous, and the kind of things they had to get up to. Nowadays, I think the same applies in airports. I'm sure in every airport, there's someone there, if he sees a manager or a player coming, he's on the phone to a press source, and they'll be getting a wee backhander for that. So you mentioned Wolves, and I have a feeling for Wolves because of my father played there at wartime.
How many games did he play?
Not many, I don't know. I honestly couldn't tell you. Very few, I would imagine, but he was signed there, and there was the landscape during the war, I think, was totally different for football. And maybe I'm bragging about him too much, but he was certainly a Wolves man, and he knew, the manager came up here, and guys like famous players like Billy Wright, he knew. I could hear him phoning Billy Wright, and this would be well after the war was finished, so we're now into the 50s. So but I wouldn't think he was of top class standard.
Yeah,
but he was a dirty rascal, I think.
Yeah. So we're moving on to page 4. So this is Liverpool making money, and it says it's a bit much finding yourself playing reserve team football when a club has paid £250,000 for you. But that's what happened to Richard Money, who Fulham collected a club record of £333,000 for in April. He says Richard is finding it difficult breaking into the first team, but has seen the likes of David Fairclough, Avi Con and Sammy Lee show that it's possible. At this point, he's only managed one substitute appearance for the first team. He was on loan spell for Derby County before moving to Luton in '82, then Portsmouth and Scunthorpe. He actually appeared in the 1980 European Cup semi-final second leg against Bayern Munich after Alan Kennedy broke his wrist. Liverpool drew that game 1-1 and went through in away goals, but unfortunately he'd be an unused sub in the final after Kennedy was able to return in time. It's not a name that I remember at all.
No, nor do I. No, I will be honest with you, lads, that when I got the magazine, I looked through, I read each article quickly, but I only focused on the ones, and there are many, with a Scottish connection, and that wasn't one. Although Liverpool has a strong Scottish connection. Well, the other one in that page, I think, was Ray Clements. Yeah. And, Ray Clements was, of course, very famous goalkeeper. And therefore, you knew him, but quite a number of the lads that I've spoken about or written about in the magazine, I was unaware of, to be very honest with you. Yeah. But every Scotsman I knew, and I knew the high-profile English boys like Ray Clements. And if I think he's the one that let the ball through his legs and upset me, because if he kept his legs shut and England had not lost that goal, we would have qualified in Euro '96, I think it was.
David Seaman.
Sorry,
David Seaman. That was.
Oh, I beg your pardon, Seaman. Seaman was the one. Yes, you're right. I beg your pardon. It was Seaman. It wasn't Clements.
Yeah. Clements Dalglish had nutmegged Clements in '76.
It's the Dalglish one through the legs. Yeah. That's it. Scotland, England. I remember that. Yes.
Yeah, but I think as you mentioned there, just that goal with Kluivert putting. I think that's a sort of collective heartbreak for all three of us, because I remember that night well when obviously we were beating Switzerland 1-0 and England were 4-0 up over Holland, and it looked like we were going through for once to the next stage. Yeah. And Seaman got beat at his near post.
That was a heartbreak, that one. We thought we didn't need to try and score another goal because we were sure that we were there because of the result. But then there was one through the keeper's legs, and that was it. But you're miles away. You've nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. But
you're hearing it, and as they say in the tranny, you're hearing it in the broadcast going through, and it was a heartbreak to us. Anyway, we've had a few of them in our time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it wouldn't be Scotland without them. So
that's right.
So moving on, so we're at the news desk page, which is lots of little stories. So I'm going to pick out a few of them, and the first one I'm going to pick out is Captain Mark keeps Leicester happy. So it says that Jimmy Greaves and Peter Shilton have criticised the appointment of Leicester City goalkeeper Mark Wallington as captain, feeling that the position is too far removed from play to generally inspire the team. What's your thoughts on that, Craig, about making a goalkeeper a captain?
Well, I think obviously if the goalkeeper has the personality and the authority, why not? Although I hear, there are complaints at the moment, one or two fans at Aberdeen, for example, because I'm thinking in the Scottish game at the moment, the Aberdeen captain is a goalkeeper. And I think, some of the fans think, he's too far removed from the play. But if he's got a presence and he's got an influence and he sees the whole pitch there from, I don't see that it should be against him. I genuinely don't. But, I can think, obviously, if everything else is equal, you would want your captain to be out in the middle of the park there in a position where he's got more influence. And, of course, he can lead by example. The goalkeeper can lead by example by making a couple of good saves. Yeah. But if he's not called upon to make a couple of good saves, there's no chance of him doing that. So, as I say, everything else is equal.
Yeah, I think many things in football, it only becomes a problem when things aren't going well.
That's right.
Discussion when things aren't going well.
See, the Aberdeen captain is Joe Lewis. Now, Joe Lewis is respected by everyone, not all the players, but by the fans. He's so popular a guy. And if Joe says jump, they jump, and he's got good authority. But there are still quite a number of the Red Army boys up there. I'm going to say the Red Army, the Aberdeen fans, who think it should be an outfield player. Mm. I think it might change next season somehow.
yeah, I think so.
What's happened. But I wouldn't rule out the goalkeeper from being the captain.
Could you say, Craig, who was the best captain that worked under you?
I beg your pardon?
Could you say who was the best captain that worked under you? Could you single somebody out, do you think?
Yes, well, obviously I was very fortunate. And I'll surprise you maybe, but I think a wonderful captain I had when I was manager at Preston, a guy called Chris Lucchetti. He's now assistant manager of Motherwell. Right. He was a colossus as a captain, but that's been very unfair to the Scottish international team because we had Gary McAllister as a captain, hugely influential. Yeah. And we had Colin Henry, who, he was outstanding as a captain. I was very fortunate that these guys were about and available to captain the team. And I was assistant manager of Scotland, and Graham Souness was the captain as well for a time and Willie Miller. I'm just trying to think when I was the assistant. So depending of who was playing at the time, but these guys were all. The interesting thing about an international team is that many of them are captains of their club team. Yeah. So you get a job when you're picking your team and you're deciding on the bench. You're going to put a club captain, as a substitute for the international team because he's not getting in the team. But I think Scotland have been lucky. They've had influential leaders as captains. And I think, Willie Miller was a very influential guy. And so you can imagine, you can hear Graham Souness as a pundit, outstanding pundit. So he would be, a captain to be respected as well. And, going further back, when Celtic were so successful, they had Billy McNeill. And I don't think there's been a better captain. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, Rangers had a wonderful one, John Gregg. And these guys, they're legends at their clubs. And battling against them there at Aberdeen was Willie Miller, doing very well against them under the leadership of Sir Alec. But, I don't know, there's not a formula. You just get a gut feeling that this guy is so respected in the dressing room and on the pitch. He's ideal material, captain material.
So you're saying there about the fact that most players in the international setup would probably be captains. So do you think possibly that the role isn't as important at international level as it maybe is at club level?
Well, I don't think it's all that important because really the coach is in charge. The coach is the main man in terms of what happens on the pitch. I think in maybe the other sport, in rugby, the captain seems to have more say in a game of rugby. He can make changes and do things. Whereas I don't think there's a captain who, the captain certainly out there motivates and talks to them out there. But in my experience is that the manager's in charge. And the manager makes the substitutions, makes the changes, not the captain. So the captain is really a leader. The captain becomes quite powerful and quite important. But I think sometimes his influence is overstated because the key person in the football club is the manager, and he's the one that determines what happens. And I think, I'm actually going through, I think, to be fair, at Manchester United, my colleague Archie Knox says they had the most wonderful captain there at Manchester United, Brian Robson, who was in charge of the whole operation there when Manchester United under Sir Alec were doing so well. And I come up to Glasgow and I look at the two clubs, and I mentioned the two main captains there, Greg and Billy McNeill. So, it'd be good to be the captain, but I think you've got to be respected by everyone in the dressing room, and you don't need to be raising your voice and shouting at them. You just have to tell them, say to them once, and that's it. And the young players in particular perhaps need an arm around them when they're coming into the team. A good captain will do that. McAllister, for example, outstanding at that. Then we had David Weir as captain, who big super guy from Everton. So, I'm trying to think of others, and I'm sure over the years there's been many. But I go back to Wolverhampton, and I remember the captain was Billy Wright, and he was England captain as well, and he was so highly respected.
Yeah. Okay, so the next one I'm going to look at in these 2 pages is Staggering Warks. This is about John Wark, and it says John Wark could easily have been on the receiving end of the 5-1 thrashing of Aris Salonika in the UEFA Cup if he'd extended his holiday last year. While on holiday near Salonika, he was offered terms by the club, which he refused. He says, 2 men introduced themselves as being from Aris, and straight away they asked me if I'd be interested in playing for them. I explained that it was under contract with Ipswich Town. So actually, John actually scored 4 of those 5 goals, and 3 of them were penalties. So he certainly had a bit of an impact on that game, if nothing else.
I think so. I think the magazine said his mother-in-law would have something to say. But the team Aris, I know it well. I was over, pardon me, I was over there, and I did a week's training with the Aris team, and they were so enthusiastic. Yeah. This was while I was working with the SFA, Scottish team. I went over to spy over there, and Andy Roxburgh knew the manager of Aris, and he told them I was coming. They said, "Well, you can take some training sessions." So I remember the big Greek guy playing, and I was getting on to him. I was giving him some Scottish words to try and encourage him, to get the lead out of certain part of his anatomy to get moving. And he says, I come to enjoy myself. I come to enjoy myself at the training. I come not to hard work. I do my work. They were part-time players, semi-pro. They worked most mornings, and they trained in the afternoon. So I was getting a big boy to train. He wasn't. I'm trying to remember his name, but maybe I shouldn't say it. But I know the club very well, and it was a super football club and a nice environment. And I'm quite sure John Watt would have loved it there if he had been playing out there. I was there. He gave a wonderful talk when he was introduced into the Scottish Football SFA Hall of Fame. He spoke very, very well. Dougie Donnelly, the interviewer, is very good at that and gets the best out of these guys. But John Watt went down a bomb, told a few stories about Liverpool, told a few stories about Scotland. And like many of the good players, they've all got a good sense of humour, and they can make a joke, and they don't take themselves too seriously. That's what I like. You don't. I always found that the bigger the star, the more humble he is.
Yeah.
People who say to me, it must be hard to handle these big names in the dressing room. And I found guys like, I was lucky. I was the assistant manager when Kenny Dalglish was still in the dressing room playing for Scotland, and Graham Souness was playing, and Gordon Strachan, and Willie Miller, and Alec McLeish. And I was the assistant manager, and whatever you tell them to do, they do. And there's no, people think, they might be hard to handle. But I think they are stars because they are responsive, and they've done throughout their career what they've been asked to do, and they've done it exceptionally well. And they like organisation, they like discipline, they like to be told. They don't like to be left airy-fairy. They want to be told exactly what you want, and they respect that. So I found it a dream to work with these guys. I'm not as far back as the ones before it. Archie Gemmill was just before me with the Scottish team. I started in 1986 as the assistant with the Scottish team at the World Cup in Mexico. And that was a very, very, very good squad that Sir Alec had there. But I've got to say to you guys that Scotland, I was lucky. I've been at 3 World Cups with Scotland on the staff. And on every occasion, our best player couldn't go. And people never mention this, and it's quite interesting. They all say, you got to the World Cup, but you didn't get out of the group, you didn't qualify. And I'll say, well, look, we lost our best player. Who was the best player when Alec Ferguson took the team to Mexico? The best player was Kenny Dalglish. Kenny was injured and didn't go. and Alan Hansen didn't go either. So the two Liverpool boys didn't go, so we were short. And there's no way we wouldn't have beaten Uruguay in that last game with Alec Ferguson in charge if Dalglish had been there. Then the next World Cup were in Italy in 1990. And the best player in Scotland that season was Davy Cooper, the winger at Rangers. And he got injured and he couldn't go to the World Cup. And obviously another one that didn't go was John Robertson, Hearts striker, wee Robbo. Both were injured. And then when I get the job and I had the team going to France in the World Cup in 98, arguably again our best player got injured just before it, Gary McAllister. So when you think we went to 3 World Cups without Dalglish, Cooper and McAllister. Now, I think one man doesn't make a team.
Yeah.
But if these guys had been in the team and playing in the games, I'm quite sure we would have qualified at least one or maybe two of the occasions, because we've not got out the group stages yet when we get to a World Cup. Hopefully we'll do it now with Stevie Clarke in the European Championship coming up soon. But I think we've got to be aware that, you know, a country like England with the resources they've got, they can lose a player, a big player, and bring in another big player.
Yeah. We
can't lose a guy like McAllister and replace him easily. Definitely can't lose Dalglish and replace him easily. No way could you replace Kenny Dalglish. So that's my excuse, guys.
None needed. Now, this next one I'm going to look at, I absolutely love. So this is a Broth's cricket score. I'll go through this and then we can have a wee chat about it. It says, most fans are aware of the highest score ever in a senior match between Arbroath and Bon Accord, where Arbroath won 36-0 in the Scottish Cup in 1885. But do you really know the real story? Shoot asks. They say that Bon Accord were in fact the Orion Cricket Club of Aberdeen, and they received an invitation from the Scottish FA to take part in the competition. They changed their name to Bon Accord as they thought it sounded better. After they'd been slaughtered, the embarrassed SFA secretary apologised and admitted the invite should have been sent to the Orion Football Club. Now, there's some dispute to this version of the story, and it suggested Bon Accord simply arrived without a full complement of players, or indeed even a full proper football strip. Other stories suggest that the players for Bon Accord also simply downed tools and let Arbroath keep scoring. There's tales that tell that the Arbroath keeper actually put an umbrella up during the game to shelter from the driving rain, which if we know Arbroath's park, then that's actually quite believable. In another article in the Marshall Cavendish Book of Football from 1972, the keeper for Bon Accord was named as Andrew Lorney, and he was quoted as saying, "It wasn't my fault." Now, apparently the Bon Accord keeper was injured the night before the game, and Lorney volunteered to step in, something he would live to regret. John Petrie, outside right for Arbroath, scored 13 goals. As great as all this is, possibly the best part of the story was on the same day in the Scottish Cup, Dundee Harp beat Aberdeen Rovers 35-0. Now, other stories suggest that they actually won 37-0, but the referee said it was only 35. And when Harp found out about the Arbroath score, they actually petitioned the referee to put in a 37-0 victory instead, which obviously didn't do. So whatever the truth, the Arbroath versus Bon Accord game has gone down in legend, and the Dundee Harp versus Aberdeen hasn't. And it just shows you what a thin line it is for these sort of things. But I just love everything about it.
You know, I read that. Well, of course, you know, I live in Aberdeen now, and Bon Accord's a very well-known name. You know, there's a Bon Accord, everything in Aberdeen, and then there was a Bon Accord team. Well, they were called Bon Accord, but of course, one of the main shopping malls is the Bon Accord Centre. So it's a bit of a football result, that. So a farcical game, obviously. So I really don't. I don't know any more about it, but I joke with the present manager of Arbroath, who's a real character, Dick Campbell. I said, Dick, you have a long way to go until you try and get into the history book at Arbroath, because you have to win more than 36-0 to get your name in the history of Arbroath Football Club. But Dick's proudly says to me, we're the best part-time team in Scotland. So they are. It's a lovely football club and a nice environment there. If the wind's not blowing, If the wind's blowing, it comes over. The waves are actually just coming over the wall from the North Sea into the stadium there at Arbroath. But everything in Arbroath's good, nice club, good people, and at the moment they're not a bad team. They're a semi-pro team, as they call them in England. We say part-time in Scotland.
I'm sure he's probably pretty confident about beating a team 37-0 the way he works in his head. So there's only that to do it. It'll be. Moving on to the next one. So this is Bruce is back. It's about Bruce Rioch is back in England in search of a club after playing with Seattle Sounders in the summer. He played 48 games at Sounders, then moved to Torquay where he played until 1984 before retiring, and he played 71 games there.
Well, I know Bruce, and I remember him being the manager at Arsenal, and I used to go down and watch players down in London for the Scottish team, and I went down to Arsenal to see Charlie Nicholas, and it was quite interesting. I think Bruce must have been suspended because he was sitting in the stand. He wasn't down in the technical area in the dugout, and I was sitting not far from him in the stand, and he acknowledged me, gave me a nod. Hello, Craig. I said, hi, Bruce. He said, I'm here to see Charlie. I says, he's a great guy. Charlie Patter's great. He's a great guy. He says, it's on the pitch I want him to be a great guy, not in the dressing room. I said, he keeps the place going in the dressing room. And I remember he kind of reprimanded me, Bruce. He says, hey, it's on the pitch I want him to be doing. Well, he scored a goal that day. I can't honestly remember who they were playing. And he scored a goal and he took acclaim from the 4 stands. He put his hands up and he faced one stand and they all applauded and they stood applauding. Then he faced the other one, the 4 of them. So he got 4 separate acclaims for his wonderful goal. It was a terrific on the volley goal he scored. And so he was so popular. But Bruce, obviously, a very good player there and a very good manager. And also he was one of the managers that Delia Smith, she likes her managers and she chooses carefully, I think. But he was a manager at Norwich. And you don't get a job at Norwich unless you're a capable guy and a likeable guy. You've got to be a nice fella. And so he was a manager at Norwich with Delia in charge of the club. So, and obviously a wonderful player for Scotland when he played.
Okay, we'll move on to this next one, which is about Birmingham fine players. So it says Archie Gemmill, Mick Page and Alan Curbishley of Birmingham City have been given the power to fine any player who gets into hot water with referees. Each fine is £2, and if they reach 20 points, then they are due for suspension. Then they will fork out £80. Anyone sent off is fined £100 plus £48 for the 12 points they collect. And as it always seems to be with these things, the fine money goes into a pool that will be used for a slap-up party in the summer. It's a lot of money, isn't it?
It is. At that time, a real amount of money, that. Yeah, I think that's quite common. I know many clubs, and 1 or 2 of the clubs that I've worked with, if a player is fined, the agreement was half goes into the Christmas night out, and the other half goes to charity. And I think that's up to the captain. You mentioned captain earlier. That's where your captain comes in. He'll maybe have a small player committee and they'll decide what they're doing with the money. And they'll also determine the level of fines. You know, how much goes in here and how much goes in there. But nowadays, with the salaries they're getting, you know, a £500 fine or a £1,000 fine is nothing to these guys who are making fortunes in the Premier League in particular. But, you know, when I worked in England, you know, if you were, I think the lads told me that at Derby County, or Nottingham Forest, I think it was, I knew the Nottingham boys, Scottish boys down there, they said if you gave a square pass in training, you were fined £25 because Clough wouldn't allow you to have a square pass. And because he explained it, he says if it's a square pass and it's intercepted, both of you are beaten. If it goes forward and it's intercepted, the guy that passed it forward can recover. If it goes back and it's intercepted, the guy that was to receive it can recover. But if it's a square pass, you know, small things like that, and that money would go into the kitty, and the kitty would be used according to the way the small players committee decided. So I think it's quite right that if a player is sent off for stupidity, for mouthing at the referee, for example, or being disrespectful, quite right to hammer him with a fine. Now, Archie, Scotland skipper Archie Gemmill, of course, we loved him in Scotland because of the wonderful goal, particularly against the Netherlands he scored when they jumped over a couple of players and slotted it. And Archie's son, Scott Gemmill, is now the coach of the Scotland under-21 team. And he played for me when I had the under-21 team of Scotland and came with the national team as well. He played in the national team also, Scott, and that's Archie's son. Of course, he's a super player and a nice guy. So I know Alan Curbishley just briefly. I don't know Mick Page at all, unfortunately. But when I was down in England, I met Alan Curbishley, very highly regarded to Glasgow Rangers. I was a student, and I wasn't a full-time footballer, but I was a full-time footballer on the student holidays, which is, you probably are aware, you're off on holiday until the end of September,
right?
And therefore, you're full-time at that time. But then I got transferred to Dundee, and I was still a part-time player for a while at Dundee. But by that time, I had been a student in my last year in teaching. Well, when I finished that, I was full-time football, and we were encouraged to go to the coaching course. Right. And the manager encouraged us as well. It was popular to go on the course because it was a social event down at Largs. And we went down to Largs, and we had a great fortnight down there with the weekend off in between, with a weekend and a week. And all the players at Dundee, when I was there, the international players, the main players, they would go on the coaching course. So I went when I was in my early 20s. So I got my A licence when I was 26 or 7, which was early. And now there's an award beyond that called the Pro Licence. Right. So we were encouraged to go because it was good pre-season training for us. One of the coaches at Largs, and he was very well regarded. And he would send the young players from his Aberdeen team, guys like Martin Buchan and Joe Harper. Yeah. They came down to Largs as runners. They weren't on the court. They were actually, we demonstrated using them. We were asked to do a coaching session. We would get the young players out, Bobby Clark, the goalie, and we would work with the professional players. So that put me into coaching early, and I enjoyed it and enjoyed the social element when you're doing the coaching course. So I finished a wee bit early playing because my knee was 5 knee operations in the course of my career, and I got transferred from Dundee to Falkirk, and I was a part-time player then. I went full-time teaching and part-time football, and Falkirk were in the Premier League. Well, there was only 2 leagues, first and second division. It was the first division, and they were in relegation trouble, so they made a couple of signings, and we managed to escape relegation. And stay in the league. But the next year again, I was limping along in one leg, and I had to give up playing early. The surgeon said, "You're going to be a cripple the rest of your life if you don't stop playing this game." And I'll go back, Tom. I don't want it highlighted, but when I was at Rangers and I got my injury at Rangers, they hadn't a qualified physiotherapist. Yeah. Would you believe a club, Glasgow Rangers Football Club? And I've got photographs. It was a good thing they did at Christmas time. They gave you a framed team photo every year you're there. And that's a memento, and all players are named. So I've still got them. And if you can't remember who played with you, these photos are a terrific reminder. But the team group photograph had you all in had all the names there. But the staff, they had only 2. They had a trainer, David Kinnear, who was and a reserve team coach and a manager. Now, when you look at the staff in a football club now, it's incredible. You'll have at least 10 staff, because you'll have a physio, maybe 2 physios, you'll have a masseur, you'll have an analyst, you'll have a sports scientist, you'll have a couple of doctors. I mean, we used to go to the World Cup when I was with the SFA. We'd go to World Cup, and the total staff. I was invited by Alec to go to Sir Alec to go to Mexico, and there was 3 coaches. There was Alec, Walter Smith, Archie Knox, and myself. And then he had a kit man who was also a physio, Hugh Allen, who did. So there was 4 of us rather. And they didn't have a specialist at that time. They later had a goalkeeping coach and a doctor and a physio. That was your lot.
Dr. Stuart Hillis was there for.
Yes, Professor Hillis, right?
Yeah.
He taught me something. He taught me a lot, but he taught me one thing. He sadly passed away, Professor Hillis. Yeah. But I'll tell you how he phoned me he taught me something quite important. He phoned me one Saturday night. He says, I just wanted to thank you, Craig. I said, what are you thanking me for? He says, I heard your interview after the game. And I said, well, why are you thanking me? He says, you mentioned me. I said, well, why are you thanking? He said, well, you mentioned me by name. Wait, hear this. He says, I've been a club doctor for years. And I listened to the manager's interview about injuries. And he'll say, the doc will have a look at him. Right? Now, he said, you said Professor Stuart Hillis, the SFA doctor, will look. He says, you mentioned me by name. You know, and I thought, why not? Now, it made me realise how important it is to acknowledge your colleagues by name. Don't say my assistant, and I hate that. I always say my colleague. I never say Archie Knox, my assistant. I always say my colleague, because you kind of put them down if you say assistant. Yeah, it's a demeaning term, I feel. Now, the doctor, your Professor Hillis, the foremost cardiologist in Scotland, is phoning me, thanking me for giving him a name check on an interview. And I thought, well, I've learned something. And thereafter, if I was talking about the groundsman, and Alec Ferguson was always very good at that. Alec would say, well, they passed the ball well today, but he says, Willie Ferguson, the groundsman, had the pitch in great order. You know, name the guy that does, name the doctor, name the physio who's treating him, and give credit. And you know, a name check is well, I'm not saying it's as good as money, but it's you know, the people like, and I didn't quite realise it until here's a professor thanking me for getting his name in the radio. So, yeah, sorry, Tom, I distracted you. You mentioned.
No, not at all.
Did you know Stuart Hillis? Do you know?
No, well, both Andy and I are Clydebank supporters.
You're Bankies, aye.
I was aware of the kind of work he did for Clydebank. So I don't think clubs really had team doctors at the time, and I was aware that he'd done a lot of kind of pioneering kind of stuff at Clydebank that's sort of running the mill now.
Oh yeah, I'll give you your best player ever.
Jerry McCabe.
It's not David Cooper, it's Jerry
McCabe. That's what I was going to come to. He was my favourite player when I started going to watch Clydebank.
Well, I'll tell you that I have never ever, in all my time in management, I've never ever had a cheque as big as I got. Jack Steedman came down to Lars with a course on, and he was signing McCabe. And how much you want for Jerry McCabe? And I says, well, not as much as how much are you going to offer? And I thought, well, Jack Steedman was a shrewd man. He said, well, we'll offer you 45,000. I said, no, you'll never get to that. 170. Anyway, we ended up on a call on the phone, and I had the authority from the chairman. Clyde needed the money, and he says, get what you can get. So I got 60,000, and I'll never forget this. He came down to Largs, and he gave me a cheque to Clyde Football Club for 60,000. I've never seen as big a cheque ever. And it was Jack Steedman, and it was for McCabe. Then, you know what he said to me, hey, Tom, and this is, the older listeners would appreciate this. He said, that was the best signing I ever made, because I sold 3 strikers for over 100,000, and they get the goal tally because the passes they got from McCabe were certainties for goals. And he said, first one I sold was Mike Larnock, over 100,000. Then I sold Tommy Coyne, over 100,000. Then I sold Bobby Williamson, over 100,000. Now, to go from a club like Clydebank and get 100,000 plus for a striker, and Jack Steedman was convinced the reason they got that money was the passes these guys got from Jerry McCabe.
Yeah, he was a terrific player, Jerry McCabe. Just the way he took on defenders, he would just run at defenders all day long.
He was Player of the Year in that league 2 or 3 years in a row. He was Player of the Year in that league with Clyde. And we were a bad team. You know, we weren't as good a team as Clydebank. You know, because you had, you know, I love Jim Fallon and guys like that. I knew Jim was a great physio with SFA. You know, and I knew a lot of the Clydebank players. Big Gallagher, the goalkeeper, Gallagher. So
that's Andy's hero you're talking about there, Jim Gallagher.
Jim Gallagher's my hero. That's my ultimate footballing hero.
Is he? Really? The goalie? Brilliant. I'm so glad to be talking to two Bankies fans. You know, what's happened to them now? Are they in the junior grade?
Yeah, well, we're in the new West of Scotland Football League, so we're a senior club again because we're in that new West of Scotland setup, and we're applying for the licence. So I think it's this week they find out whether they're getting the licence, and then we can get back into the big Scottish Cup again.
Oh, that's great. Well, I had a great affection for Clydebank Football Club, and part of the reason was Stuart Hillis, because he worked with the SFA and he was a real gentleman. And Andy Roxburgh, of course, was related to the Steedmans.
Yeah.
And therefore I was quite early in my time with the SFA introduced to the Steedman family, you know. And I'm saying I'm fed up beating you with Clyde, you know, and they tell us when you ever beat us.
Craig, I did notice in your book that you mentioned that there was a season that you beat Clydebank twice, even though we finished in second position, so thank you for that mention. Yeah.
Did I say that? I don't know. I can't remember, but I have a great affection for the Bankies and, of course, for the Steedmans, and particularly for Jerry McCabe. And, of course, I was at Motherwell as the assistant manager and as the manager later, and we had Davy Cooper at Motherwell. And Davy was unbelievable football player. And, of course, at Clydebank, he was just unstoppable. He's probably your best ever player, was he, Davy?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. He's still regarded
slightly better than Jerry. I'll tell him that. I'm talking to a couple of Bankies fans and said that Cooper was better than you.
Well, Jerry should have played at a higher level. He really should have got a transfer to a bigger team.
Well, I don't think. I hope you'll edit this, but I'll tell you how I got him. And he won't thank me for. You would need to clear it with him if you kept it in. Okay. He was down at Lads as a runner. As I said to you, I told you the young boys, Aberdeen used to send their runners, like the Martin Buchans and the Joe Harpers, down to it. And he was at Hibs first. And Eddie Turnbull was his manager. And we were down in the bar one night and in Lads after the day's work. And I'd sitting beside Eddie. I loved Eddie Turnbull. Like, just listen to him to learn. And we'd been at the bingo, and we'd been in the bar, and we're walking up, and it's after midnight, and as we're walking up that driveway, there's a body lying below the road at Hindenbush, curled up, and I looked at this body, and I walked over, and it was curled up, and it was rolled over. It was out like a light, with a little too much to drink. So I kind of rolled him with my foot, and it was Jerry McCabe, right? Of course, Eddie Turnbull came over. Eddie was his manager at Hibs, and he's lying there, and he grabbed him. He says, "McCabe, you're sacked. You are finished. You just..." And Eddie was a hard man, and he threw him back into the grass. I don't know. It was a lovely night, certainly. Maybe he slept the whole night there. I don't know. Maybe, I think some of the boys coming up later would bring him in. But he sacked him. Mm-hmm. Right, so he couldn't get a club. So where did he go? He went to Canada, and he went to Toronto, Italia, an Italian team in Toronto, and he was there for a couple of seasons or 18 months. And we had a Clyde boy, Jim Boyd, fullback, and Boyd, he says, "My pal's coming back from Canada. Do you remember him?" I says, "What's his name?" He says, "Jerry McCabe." "Oh," I says, "I remember him all right. Is he coming back?" He said, "An offer from Partick Thistle." I said, "How much are they offering?" He says, "I don't know." I said, "Well, I'll make him an offer. I would rather he beat Partick Thistle to him. They're our rivals in Glasgow, at Clyde. So I don't think Jerry would thank me for telling you we gave him £100, £100 to sign for Clyde, honestly, and then sold him for 60,000. But that's why he got sacked for. I don't know how much you edit this thing.
We'll cut it out. Aye.
I think you should be careful. The only way to keep it in is if you can get hold of Jerry.
We'll try and get in touch with him then.
Yeah.
If he authorises you to tell me, I don't think it's very fair. But that's because you're Bankies. I'm telling you the story of him. but he was a marvellous player for Clyde and helped us win the championship that time.
Well, the other player at your time at Clyde I was going to ask you about was Pat Nevin.
Yes.
Could you? I mean, I imagine you could see just the talent in him even as a young boy.
Yes, she's another one. You see, McCabe gets sacked by Hibs. Me, Pat gets sacked by Celtic. But the one that I had before him, my first year at Clyde, was probably definitely a bigger name than Pat, was Steve Archibald. And we sold him to Aberdeen, to Billy McNeil. And then Billy sold him to Tottenham for 800,000. We get 25,000, 800,000. And then he went for over $1 million to Barcelona. So Pat was a very, very outstanding player, but he wasn't. His transfer fee was 95,000 from Clyde to Chelsea, and he was the European Youth Player of the Year. Scotland won the Under-18 European Championship. In Finland, they beat Czechoslovakia in the final, and Pat got the man of the match, and he was the best. He got the award, the best youth player in Europe. So they stole him for 95,000, Chelsea, and away he went. And his book's just coming out. He says,
right, yeah.
And
you capped him. You capped him for Scotland as well. I think you gave him his last cap for Scotland.
Yeah,
came full circle.
We picked him for the under-21s and for the national team. So Pat was a good. Pat was a very good, unbelievable player in the league we were in. You know, your Clyde Bankies couldn't get near him.
No, I know. I remember watching him play in those days. Yeah, and he was a terrific player. I've always liked him as a player.
He was well. I sold quite a lot of. Well, I had to sell one every year. The other one that interestingly we sold was Ian Ferguson, and they went to St Mirren for 60,000, and they sold them to Rangers for $1 million. And there was no add-ons in those days. You know, you get a top up now. He didn't get it in those days. So we didn't get anything extra for Archibald, the two big moves. We didn't get anything extra for Pat Nevin. And another one we sold was Joe Ward. We sold Joe Ward to Aston Villa, and we didn't get any add-on. He was a 90,000, and we sold the boy Tommy McQueen to Aberdeen. So,
I mean, while at Clyde, Steve Archibald was still playing. He was playing the midfield role, was it?
Yes, that's right. Well, you're clued in. I'm impressed.
Yeah, and it was Billy.
He went to Aberdeen, and it was Billy McNeil that was the Clyde manager before Clyde. He went to Aberdeen, and he took him as a midfield player for 25,000. And he said, and this, I'll never forget his word. He said, if he doesn't make it in midfield, I'll put him back as the sweeper and replace Willie Miller. That's what he said. But in what happened in a practice match up there, he put him up front in a training game, and he played against McLeish and Miller and scored 3 goals. And they looked at each other. The trainer with the reserve, Teddy Scott, and Teddy Scott looked at Big Billy and said, "Look, why don't we try Archibald in the first team up front?" It was just a try, and it was outstanding.
It's incredible.
So that's how it happened.
Yeah, it's incredible things like that. I mean, we'll talk about.
He was a midfield player at Clyde, and he was a very good midfield player, and he was rough. And, you know, he get tackles in. I like a midfield player that get the tackles in.
Yeah.
I'm operating this all right. I'm looking at my screen here, and I've got you on the screen. I don't know if I'm still. Am I still there?
No, I can still see you.
Yeah. Let me just.
If I'm there, I'll take my glasses off, and I don't need them on to see. Just okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we'll move on a few pages in the magazine. There's a few. There was an article there actually that we didn't cover. Well, we sort of did. It was about Steve Archibald, and they said that basically his cost to Spurs was 4 times what their entire 61 League and Cup double team would have cost, which I don't think really is a fair comparison you can do. You know, £800,000, £850,000 to compare that to something from the 60s. I don't think that was a particularly... but I don't know if you noticed in this, so this is a briefly section, little snippets, but there was something about David Bowman. So it says, Hearts fans are enjoying a like father, like son situation this season. Yeah. The reason is 16-year-old David Bowman, a midfield player who's making a big impression since his introduction to the first team. David's father, Andy Bowman, was one of the stars in the Hearts side in the 60s. Now, I know you have a certain affinity with a player from Hearts who would have been around about that time. Is he still your favourite player, Dave Mackay?
Yes. Well, as a boy, he was my favourite player. And, you know, he played for, I think he was the fans' favourite at 3 different clubs, and that takes a bit of doing. At Hearts, and at Tottenham, and at Derby County. Now, you don't get a better accolade than that, than being the man that is the fans' favourite at each of these clubs. And that's just the style of play he had. He was so aggressive and so talented that and he was. My father used to take me to see him. He didn't take me to see Hearts. He took me to see Dave Mackay. If they were in the west of Scotland, we lived in Hamilton, so we'll take you over to Motherwell to see Mackay. Airdrie were in the league at the time. We'll go to Airdrie and we'll go to Celtic. We'll see Mackay. We're not going to see Hearts. We're going to see Dave Mackay. We'll watch everything he does, see what you can learn. You know, and I don't know what I learned, but what I did see was a guy who had terrific ability, but great enthusiasm and great determination, and no little skill. He was captain of Hearts, and we were a game at Motherwell. He ran out with the ball. In those days, they went out. Nowadays, they walk out kind of hand in hand, you know. But in those days, the teams went out separately. And I remember at Fir Park watching them coming out, and he was the captain, and he ran with the ball in his hand to the centre circle, right? And the players ran out as well into their half of the park, and they were doing some exercise. And he threw the ball up in the air, and he drop kicked it with his heel. He back-heeled it from the centre circle right into the goal. I couldn't believe that. He threw it up there high, and on the drop, it was a half volley backwards. It was hard to do. Ask a player to do that facing forwards, and it's quite an achievement to get it into the goal from the halfway line. Well, he back-heeled it into the goal, and that was no wonder he was my hero.
I know now where your knee injury problems came from. That was you trying that, wasn't it?
Oh, I never tried that. I could never begin to do that.
Okay.
But, that was David Mackay, but a terrific enthusiasm, terrific quality player. And you know, down in Derby, they love him. And at Tottenham, they love him. And they loved him at Hearts as well.
Yeah. Oh, what a